Tzu Chi is the largest Buddhist organization in Taiwan. It's also Taiwan's largest charitable organization and largest private landholder. We'll start with the story of Tzu Chi's founder, a Buddhist nun named Cheng Yen. Cheng Yen was born in a town in Taiwan called Qingshui in 1937. At that time, the island was under the colonial occupation of the Japanese Empire. Her childhood was marked by destructive Allied bombardment of Taiwan at the end of the Second World War. She would have been 7 or 8 years old when governance of Taiwan was transferred to the Republic of China, the same government that rules Taiwan today. She was a pious Buddhist from a young age, and left home to begin a life of spiritual cultivation at the age of 23. At 25, she shaved her head and committed to a life of monasticism. The problem is that one cannot be a self-ordained Buddhist nun or monk. Official ordination by another monastic is necessary. She realized she would need to take on a Buddhist master as her teacher and preceptor, while seeking instruction at Taipei's Linji Temple. She happened to encounter Master In Shun while she was there, and he agreed to formally ordain her. It's important for the story of the Tzu Chi organization and its interpretation of Buddhism to know a little bit about In Shun and the school of thought that he represented, referred to in English as humanistic Buddhism. Humanistic Buddhism is, in some sense, a form of Buddhist modernism, the attempt at reconciling Buddhism with the form of modernity brought about by Western domination of the globe during the 19th and 20th centuries. Chinese Buddhism during the late imperial period was perceived, to varying degrees of accuracy, as somewhat reclusive. There was a time, for example during the height of Chinese Tantric Buddhism during the Tang Dynasty, when Buddhism was deeply involved with affairs of state and public life. But Chinese Buddhism was gradually displaced at court by Neo-Confucianism and, in the case of the Yuan and Qing, Tibetan Buddhism. It's actually not totally true that Buddhism was weak during the Ming and Qing dynasties, nor that it was socially unengaged. Chunfang Yu's book, The Renewal of Buddhism in China, is a good read on how lay societies for Nianfo recitation and vegetarianism, as well as monastic adherence to the Vinaya, were actually quite strong in China during and after the mid-Ming. Nonetheless, there was a real perception by the turn of the 20th century that Chinese Buddhism was concerned entirely with inner issues and a favorable afterlife, to the detriment of meaningful engagement with society during the present. It seems that this accusation must have hit close to home, at least in some cases, because it was taken to heart by Chinese Buddhist thinkers like the monk Taishu. Taishu was born in Zhejiang in 1890 and became a Buddhist monk in the Linji lineage of the Chan sect at the age of 16. While living in Nanjing, he was exposed to radical politics and became an anarchist. In Taishu's writings on the need for reform, he coined the term humanistic Buddhism, in Chinese 人尽佛教, which reinterprets a number of age-old Buddhist concepts. For example, Taishu replaced the traditional hope for post-mortem rebirth in a pure land with a determination to transform the earth into a pure land through adherence to Buddhist ethical principles and widespread understanding of Buddhist philosophy, particularly the ultra-idealist Yogacara tradition. Taishu's humanistic Buddhism falls squarely into the category of Buddhist modernism that we discussed in the last video on Vipassana, and de-emphasized many of the supernatural or otherworldly elements of traditional Buddhism without usually outright denying them. Although Taishu later walked back his radical ideas and became a friend and ally of the fascist gangster Chiang Kai-shek, his writings on humanistic Buddhism inspired his pupils to go on to become notable Buddhist masters and reformers themselves. One of these was Master In Shun, also originally from Zhejiang, who fled the Chinese Civil War to Hong Kong and thence to Taiwan, where he encountered Tzu Chi's founder, Master Cheng Yen, and exposed her to humanistic Buddhist thought. Cheng Yen's application of humanistic Buddhism wasn't the sole result of teaching she received from In Shun, but also of two important experiences she had as a young nun. The first took place while she was living in Hualien, a city on Taiwan's east coast. I hate to make another digression, but it's relevant to know a little about Taiwan's geography and ethnic makeup here. The large majority of Taiwan's population are ethnically Han Chinese and live along the flat and fertile west coast. The rest of the island is covered in steep mountains, from the center all the way to the west to the east coast, some of the tallest mountains in East Asia. In the mountainous center and east coast of Taiwan, the population remains in large part indigenous. Taiwan was populated almost entirely by Austronesian peoples up until the arrival of the Chinese in the 17th century. The indigenous Taiwanese people have long been mistreated and underserved, having been pushed back in the 16 and 1700s from the plains into remote mountain communities. Hualien is one of the only population centers outside the flat and fertile west coast, and it still may be tens of miles of steep mountains away from some indigenous communities. While living in Hualien, one of Master Cheng Yen's activities was visiting bedridden hospital patients. One day, while at the hospital, she saw a trail of blood on the floor. She came to learn that in a nearby room, an indigenous woman had died in childbirth. She and her family had traveled on foot for 8 hours to try to find a hospital, and even after getting there, could not afford assistance. Cheng Yen was completely horrified. She felt deeply that no one should suffer like this. Not long afterward, she had a meeting with Catholic nuns who pressed her on why Buddhism did not engage charitably as much as Catholics did. This also affected her deeply. Tzu Chi began as an organization in 1966, when Cheng Yen's double-digit number of nun and lay disciples began knitting and selling baby shoes, as well as donating 2 cents of their own money a day. Over time, they should be able to, even with a small sum, contribute to save lives, such as the indigenous woman who had passed away in the hospital. Over the next few decades, Tzu Chi began opening hospitals, clinics, and schools as their membership grew and grew to massive numbers, as well as fundraising and organizing volunteers for disaster relief and environmental preservation. Today, they are active all over the world, although Taiwan is still the center of their activity. I've placed Tzu Chi on the gradualist and exoteric side, but the fact of the matter is that Tzu Chi is only kind of a Buddhist sect. Master Cheng Yen's lineage is ultimately Linji Chan, via Inshun and Taishu, which is strongly Subitistic as a Chan school. But the actual aims of Tzu Chi as an organization have very little to do with Chan Buddhism's emphasis on sudden enlightenment. The priority is this worldly social transformation through a fairly secular ethics of compassion. Buddhist doctrine very much takes a back seat to charitable action, and making the world a better place is certainly a gradual process. They are exoteric because they encourage the involvement of people at every level of society, regardless of their initiation or familiarity with the deeper layers of Buddhist doctrine and ritual. Although Tzu Chi has faced some skepticism about certain financial issues and discourages political activism, which I disagree with, my attitude toward them is overwhelmingly positive. It's very hard to disagree that we should all give a little bit of our own wealth and energy toward helping people who are struggling, and Tzu Chi has helped countless thousands of people in need. Furthermore, Tzu Chi's philosophy is that charitable action doesn't only help the less fortunate, it also helps those who are using their time, energy, and wealth to give become more compassionate people that have a deeper relationship with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. One square to the right, however, despite being so close to Tzu Chi, which I revere, is a group of so-called Buddhists I find incredibly frustrating, the secular Buddhists. Check back in next time if you want to hear my critique of them.